from a flat raw file to a finished portrait full of life. Now today we're inside the City Palace in Jaipur in Rajasthan. It's one of my favourite places to photograph in all of India. And in just a few minutes I'll take you step by step through how I process one of these portraits. Now India is a photographer's dream. The colour, the texture, the people, the sheer variety of subjects. In Rajasthan especially, you can spend weeks just wandering and never run out of things to photograph. Now, this portrait was taken at the Jaipur City Palace, where the keepers and the guards add as much character to the scene as the architecture itself. I shot this on a Canon 5 DSLR with the 70-200mm 2.8 lens, which is one of my favourite travel setups for portraits, albeit it's a little heavy in the bag. The beautiful thing about this lens focal range is that it lets you get close without intruding, and the detail out of this 50 megapixel RAW file is incredible. So let's jump into the edit. So as you can see, I've got a number of different files from the City Palace in Jaipur here. We're going to work on one of the guards, but just to be a little bit different, let's do that today in Adobe Camera Raw, which is hosted by Bridge. It's exactly the same processing engine as I mentioned in a previous video. Let's take a look. We're working on the guards. I'm probably more interested in the chap with the red turban and the blue tunic. I think that's not a bad pose. That's probably the best pose. That's not bad, but obviously that ruins that one. We're back to the chap fully in red. Now, I think this is definitely pose of the day for me. So this is the one we're going to work on. So it's a fairly clean file, as you'll see. This is the flat raw file, which is exactly what we want because this has the maximum room for us to work with. Because it was shot on a Canon 5D SR with a 70-200mm 2.8 lens at a 1600th of a second, ISO 200, there's virtually no noise in the image. So let's come out of that, load it into Adobe Camera Raw. So let's start with the processing of this image. Now, the first thing I do, I'm not going to touch the temperature or tint as such because as it stands, the adjustments I make may well change the color temperature, and certainly increasing contrast will do so. So that's something that I will target if I feel I need to at the very end. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the vibrance and the saturation in the image. Now, saturation is a global adjustment. It targets all of the tones within the image and it increases the saturation of those colors. Now, vibrance, on the other hand, selectively boosts less saturated colors and makes it a more subtle and natural way of boosting the colors within the image while also protecting skin tones. So in this instance, I'm going to give it, say, 15 points of vibrance and about 5 of saturation. That should just give me a nice sort of starting point for my image. Now, with regards to the exposure, looking at it, it's a well-exposed image. It doesn't need, I feel, to be dropped or to be raised in any way. I will increase contrast, though. I'm going to give it around about 5 points of contrast. Now, when I change the blacks and the whites, that will also increase the contrast as I go, but that's a good starting point. Now, looking at the background, I do want to drop the highlights back. So I'm going to drop them back to, say, 50 points here. And I'm just doing it by eyeball, obviously, but that just makes the background a little less blown out. If I then increase the shadows, bring those up to around about 25 points there, that gives me more of a filmic look, I feel. Just a quick P, pressing the P key, gives me a before and after, and it's subtle, but it's just bringing back a little bit of the background there. So that's not a bad starting point. The next thing we want to do is come down to the whites, and I'm going to increase the whites with the image. When I push this to the right, it gives me a little bit of it gives me more of a bright feel in the white areas of the image. If I drag the blacks down, obviously I'm targeting the blacks, bring those down to around about 15 points there. Now, by doing that, as I mentioned again in a previous video, what I'm doing is I'm effectively increasing the contrast in the image. And that gives me quite a nice feel. Again, I'm going to press the P key. And yeah, you can see we're starting to just make the gentleman pop that little bit more. Let's come down to, I'm going to come back to Color Mixer in a moment, but let's come down to Sharpening. I'm going to sharpen the image up. There's no real noise in the background, so I'm not worried about masking what areas of the image I sharpen and what I don't. I'm going to give it an overall sharpening of 80 points. And that's That's a good starting point. I can then, when I output to, let's say if I bring this into Photoshop to do any different cleanups that I might want to do, or if I go straight to print, I can then add some extra sharpening then if I need to. I think this should be adequate for this particular image. As I mentioned in another video as well, I like to sharpen as I go, so at different stages. If I'm going straight to web, this won't need any extra sharpening, I don't feel. Even if I downsize it, it will be sharp enough. If I'm going to make a very large print, I may consider tweaking it and adding just a little bit of extra sharpening on the gentleman's face, which I would do locally in Photoshop. Let's come up to the color mixer tab though, and I am interested here. If I select the little targeting reticule and selecting the saturation tab, let's select this. I want to make his turban there that little bit more saturated. So I can just click and drag, and it's going to be very subtle. It may even be imperceptible on the YouTube video, but it's just giving me a little bit extra red in his turban there that I like. And I'm going to come down and subtly increase the blue on his tunic as well. And yeah, that's about right. That works for me. So that's in a pretty good place. The next thing that I want to do really is add a little bit of a vignette to the overall image. So just drag and just draw the viewer's eye into the subject. Now I'm going to address really where I want people to look is at his face first of all. So let's just target the gentleman's face with a local mask. Come up to the masking tab, and I do want to select people. I'm not interested in the whole person. I'm interested in his facial skin and eyebrows, eye sclera, iris, and pupil, lips, and facial hair. And you'll notice that where the red ruby lith overlay sits, that's the mask that's going to be created. So let's create that. I could have created 6 separate masks if I want to, but that's not necessary in this instance. Let's bring up the exposure on his face, just drawing the eye in that little bit more. And a little bit, dropping back the blacks a little bit, increasing the contrast, increase the shadows, and let's just see, hard to see with all those annoying mask overlays there. I can't get rid of those, but for now, let's just see. You can see the difference it's making there. Yeah, that's not bad. Now, I'm happy with that, but I want to draw attention to the face even more. So let's suppose that what I do now is if I create a new mask, using a radial gradient. And I'm going to push this radial gradient just around the gentleman's head here. It's got the last settings applied to it, so let's undo that. We don't need those. Now, if I want to darken the background behind his head, obviously with the mask as it currently stands, it's going to darken his face too. Well, that's not what I want. So if I come up to the subtract tab here, and I'm going to use the man himself, select people, to basically subtract that from the mask I've created. By doing that, you'll see now that my mask extends only behind the gentleman's head. Now, I'm looking to decrease the exposure here just to bring the eye more to his face. If I take this all the way, you'll see, obviously, it looks ridiculous. But what I'm looking to do is just a subtle nod to bring the eye towards his face that little bit more. So let's just see. Yeah, you can just see it's making just a very subtle difference to the image. Now, that I like, though. At that point, we are pretty much ready to go back to the main tab and decide, well, is it ready to go, or do I want to change the color? I'm happy with the color temperature as it is. I like that. I will now just add a little bit of clarity to the image. Clarity is mid-tone contrast, and it just gives me that nice bit of crunch to the photograph. Underneath that, you'll notice there's also the Dehaze tab. Now, clearly, this isn't a landscape image, so why would I use Dehaze here? Well, Dehaze basically increases the contrast and saturation in low-frequency areas. So think of things like a smooth or less detailed background area. And it's designed to really cut through fog and mist by guesstimating light that may have been lost due to it being scattered by the haze. Well, again, clearly there is no haze in this image, but what it does for me when I'm doing this sort of portrait is, and it's very subtle, you may not even notice it, but it does just add a little bit of extra crunch overall to the image, which I quite like. So at this point, we're at a pretty good
point for output, so we could have this ready for print if we want. Might add a tiny bit, 10, 15 points of exposure there. I don't feel the need to change the temperature. This is as I remember it when I shot the image. The last thing I could decide to do, and I'd like your opinion on this, is I like it as it is, but do I crop it just down to feel a little bit more balanced? And that may be, yeah, that's not bad. It certainly feels a little bit more balanced, but I think I actually prefer the uncropped version. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments below, cropped or uncropped. But yeah, I think that's now ready to output, so we'll leave that there.
And there you have the final finished conversion. Now here's 5 tips for visiting Jaipur beyond the standard visit the Hawa Mahala and get there early to beat the crowds. Tip number 1, try a lassi wallah. Now they're creamy, they're refreshing, and they're an absolute Jaipur classic. They're always fresh and they sell out every day apparently. Number 2, dress with respect. Now you need light, breathable clothes, but make sure you cover your shoulders and your knees for entry into the temples and the palaces. Number 3, carry small notes. Cash is useful for things like tuk-tuks, chais, and small entry fees, and most of all for giving tips, which you will be asked for quite a bit. Number 4, watch the light. Shoot either early or late because Jaipur's pink sandstone glows at sunrise and sunset. It's perfect for portraits and architecture. Number 5, and most important really, take breaks. Step into a palace cafe or a rooftop terrace for a chai because the pace of the city can be intense and overwhelming. Now, I'll be sharing many more of my images from Rajasthan over time. It's honestly one of my favourite regions to photograph, and I have a huge catalogue of stories still to come. If you'd like to see more raw edits like this, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and check out my last video where I stitched a panorama of the Dome of St. Peter's in Rome together. Now, it's a completely different subject, but the same idea, bringing the very best out of your raw files. Thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.